I'm Andrew Joseph Keith. I'm an online sculpting instructor, and in this video I wanted to give you a tip if you're just starting out in sculpting, and this is a general tip for any type of sculpting, whether you're sculpting traditionally in clay like I like to do, or if you're more interested in digital sculpting. Now, what this tip basically boils down to is being able to understand and represent accurate simplifications. Now, ideally, we'd all like to be able to represent the figure in a hyper-anatomical style where we understand and are able to form every muscle group and that it looks super realistic and lifelike. But before we can create something that complex, we really need to understand how to simplify. So for a visual understanding of this type of simplification, here's a small skull reference that's very anatomically correct. And because of that, it's very complex. There's a lot of texture and detail and many anatomical forms. But what I've done is I've laid out some lines to represent some of the high points, and then I can use those lines to simplify. So here in this cement cast of this simplified version of the skull, you can see where I've taken some of those high points and then I've simplified them, I've removed the details, and so while it has all of the landmarks and structure of the skull, I've been able to basically erase all of that surface texture and surface detail. The reason that that's important is because if we want to be able to get it to a point where we can add all of those details back, we have to be able to get it to a point where the structure is sound. If you like this type of content, it would really help me out if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell if you'd like to be notified about future videos. Now, I can even simplify the head a little bit more by removing more details and making it more blocky and geometric. Here you can see this Bridgman style block-in based on George Bridgman's drawings that allowed him to understand the structure and placement and angle of the head, devoid of any of the details. Here's another simplification of the head. This one's basically a wedge shape that tapers towards the front plane of the face along the center line, and then is basically a head shape with all of the features removed when you look at it from the side view. Being able to take something as complicated as the face and then simplify it into an accurate block-in is one of the fundamental skills that every sculptor should have. So when we apply that to the full figure, we get something like these mannequin references. This is just a simple one I found at a thrift store, but basically the idea is simplifying the limbs and parts of the body into cylinders, boxes, egg shapes. And by doing that, we're able to better understand what I refer to as the primary forms. These are the basic structure on top of which we can start to add the details like the anatomy. Here's an example of those simplified versions of the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis. So the pelvis turns into kind of a bloated box shape. The rib cage is similar to an egg, and the head is that simplified head. We just have an indication of the jaw, the front, the cranial mass in the back. And one of the assignments for the Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course over at Proko.com/sculpture is the mannequinization exercise, where we take the figure and we simplify it into a mannequin, where we try to understand the figure as a simplified geometric collection of forms. Here you can see one of the assignments from the portrait sculpting course where we did the same thing with the portrait. We took the head and then we represented what I would consider the secondary forms of the face, but we simplified them so that we just have an indication of the brow ridge, the nose, the mound of the mouth, the jaw, the ears, but all of these are simplified and we remove the details so that we can better understand the essential structure of those forms. And then on top of this, you can see I've gone in and laid in the fat pads of the face. So once we have the simplification, once we're able to represent that, then we can go in and add detail on top of that. So if you want to be able to sculpt something like this, it's important to be able to understand how to start like this. Now, sculpting is difficult. Don't expect it to be easy, but it's much easier when you start simple and then slowly and thoughtfully add the complex forms on top of those simplifications. Now, when you're doing additive sculpture, that means like clay sculpting, when you're finding the form by adding material, you want those simplifications to be nice and thin so that you have room to build out the thickness and detail on top of it. However, if you're doing a subtractive sculpture, like a stone sculpture, you want those simplifications to be nice and fat to give yourself room for if you make any mistakes, and then you slowly push in to the details by removing material. But the basic principle is the same of understanding the simplification and laying out a simplified version of the figure first, and then using that simplified structure to inform the details as you continue to progress through the sculpture. Hopefully you found this tip helpful. Hopefully it motivates you to go and sculpt something. If you'd like to join my online sculpting courses, the Figure Sculpting Fundamentals course is where I recommend most people begin. It has everything that I wish I knew when I started sculpting people, and you can find that at proko.com/sculpture. Once you finish that course, I encourage you to move on to the Portrait Sculpting course, where we go over things like anatomy, and it's a little bit more of an advanced course. The portrait is difficult, so it's a great thing to study and practice. And then if you've done both of those courses, then you might even consider moving on to the hand sculpting course, where you can learn how to sculpt the hands, which, as we all know, are very difficult. Oh, also in June 2025, I'll be doing an in-person sculpture workshop, and there's a link down below if you're interested in more information on that. So if you'd like to come join me in my home studio and we can sculpt together, get direct feedback, then I hope you'll consider joining me for that workshop. You can find links to all of those in the description below. As always, I hope you can stay creative and stay productive, and hopefully I'll see you again soon in another video.